On December 18, 1995, the groundskeepers of Pleasant Valley Memorial Park in Annandale, Virginia, walked their usual route through the cemetery just after sunrise. The day was cold, with frost still on the grass. Near Section 12 of the park, beneath a small group of cedar trees decorated for the holidays, they saw a woman sitting upright against one of the trunks. Her legs were stretched out and crossed at the ankles. At first glance, they believed she might have fallen asleep in the cold. When they approached, they realized she was no longer alive. The woman appeared to be middle-aged or older. She wore a red sweatshirt, a blue-gray jacket, tan slacks, and a pair of tennis shoes. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Beside her was a small, decorated Christmas tree, placed carefully next to her body. A backpack and several personal items were arranged neatly on the ground. There were no signs of an altercation, no evidence of a struggle, and no indication that her death was the result of foul play. Police from Fairfax County were called to the scene. Detectives noted the woman's posture and the organization of the items around her. A clear plastic cup lay near her, containing the remnants of eggnog mixed with rum. 2 empty pill bottles were found inside her belongings. Toxicology testing later confirmed that the woman had died by ingesting large quantities of over-the-counter sleeping pills and alcohol. A plastic bag had been tied loosely over her head, reinforcing that she had intended not to be found until after her death. She carried no identification, no wallet, no driver's license, no bills, no membership cards. Any labels that might have identified her on clothing or personal items appeared to have been removed. Investigators found a notebook in her belongings with only a single line written inside it. "Now I lay me down to sleep." A second note, addressed to whom it may concern, stated she was choosing to end her life and did not want anyone to trace her family. She requested no autopsy and no embalming. On her body was $1,500 in cash, intended to cover cremation costs. Detectives attempted to trace her clothing and items. The brand of her sweatshirt was generic. Her jacket was mass-marketed and carried no identifying codes. The pills she used were traced to a store chain, but the bottles could not be tied to a specific location or customer. The woman appeared to have taken deliberate steps to conceal her identity. Investigators compiled a physical description. A white woman estimated to be between 50 and 70 years old, approximately 5 feet tall, around 150 pounds, with short gray hair. Dental records showed several restorations, including a gold crown. Fingerprints were taken and compared nationally, but no match was found. Because she had no criminal record and had not been fingerprinted professionally, the prints offered no immediate leads. Her photograph was circulated to law enforcement and missing persons organizations across Virginia and the surrounding states, but no one came forward to identify her. Fairfax County detectives searched through missing persons reports dating back years. They compared her age and physical features to dozens of women listed as missing in Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Nothing aligned. Investigators contacted local hotels, motels, and shelters to see if anyone matching her description had checked in around the time of her death. No employees recalled seeing her. No vehicle was found nearby that could be connected to her. Forensic analysis revealed subtle clues about her life. She had taken good care of her teeth and had likely received regular medical attention in the past. She showed signs of previous injuries that had healed long ago. Her clothing was clean and fairly new. Toxicology confirmed she had taken around 100 tablets of an over-the-counter sedative. The amount of alcohol in her system was relatively low, supporting the conclusion that the alcohol was only used to aid the ingestion of the pills. Despite the extensive information about how she died, nothing revealed who she was. The case remained open through the late 1992s and into the early 2000s. Over time, the unknown woman became known publicly as the Christmas Tree Lady, a name referencing the decorated tree found beside her. Online discussions and missing person forums circulated her composite drawings. Families of long-missing women contacted Fairfax County investigators to inquire whether the Christmas Tree Lady might be their relative. Each lead was examined, but none matched. In 2000, digital reconstructions of her face were released. artists attempted to restore the features she would have had in life. Her image appeared in local media and national missing person bulletin boards. Again, no one identified her. Detectives continued to revisit the case every few years, reviewing national missing person entries and checking new databases as they became available. By the late 2010s, forensic genealogy had become a powerful tool for resolving long unsolved identification cases. In 2021, the Fairfax County Police Department authorized a new attempt to extract DNA from the woman's remains. Specialists succeeded in obtaining a viable sample. The DNA was submitted to a private forensic genealogy laboratory, which began the process of comparing her genetic markers to profiles in publicly available genealogy databases. Over months, genealogists built a family tree using distant relatives. In May 2022, after nearly 27 years, investigators identified the woman as 9-year-old Joyce Meyer, originally from Davenport, Iowa. She had been born in 1926. Records showed she had lived in multiple states throughout her adult life, including Michigan and Pennsylvania. She had no children. Her parents and siblings had long since passed away, and she had become estranged from extended family. At the time of her disappearance from public records, she had not been in contact with relatives for many years. When investigators contacted surviving family members during the 2022 inquiry, they confirmed the woman's identity through DNA and photo comparison. With her name confirmed, detectives attempted to reconstruct her final years. Public record searches indicated she had moved frequently and had lived alone. There were no recent employment records, no active driver's license, and no medical records showing ongoing care. It remains unclear where she lived immediately before arriving in Virginia or why she chose Pleasant Valley Memorial Park for her death. Investigators noted that the cemetery's quiet location and evergreen trees may have been a deliberate choice, consistent with the organization of her belongings and the prepared notes she left behind. Although the identification brought closure to her identity, investigators emphasized that the case contained no evidence of foul play. Every detail, from the handwritten notes to the money for cremation, supported that Joyce Meyer had planned her death alone. With the case reclassified as a resolved identity investigation, law enforcement notified surviving relatives and closed the file after confirming that no criminal act had occurred. For nearly 3 decades, the Christmas Tree Lady remained one of Fairfax County's most well-known unidentified persons cases. Her name, image, and the details of her final day circulated widely among investigators, journalists, and missing persons advocates. With the 2022 identification, her name was restored and her story placed within the context of her own life rather than anonymity. Joyce Meyer now rests under a confirmed identity, ending the chapter that had labeled her only as the woman beneath the decorated tree on a winter morning in 1995. During the mid-1980s, a series of unsolved homicides began to surface along major highways and rural roads across the southeastern United States. The victims were all women, most found with reddish hair, natural or dyed, and many were discovered with little information available about their identities. Because of these similarities, investigators across multiple states eventually connected the crimes under a single name, the Redhead Murders. The cases emerged between 1983 and 1985, spanning Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. The pattern suggested a serial offender traveling along interstate corridors, targeting women living transient lifestyles or hitchhiking along the region's roadways. The earliest known victim connected to the group was found on the 13th of February, 1983. Her remains were discovered near Littleton, West Virginia, along Interstate 70. The woman, later identified as 1-year-old Epsie Regina Black Pilgrim from North Carolina, had reddish blonde hair and had been killed by strangulation. No identification was found with her. For months, she remained unnamed until later dental comparison linked her to a missing persons report from North Carolina. 5 months later, on the 24th of June, 1983, the body of another unidentified woman was found near a truck stop off Interstate 81 Knox County, Tennessee. The victim had been strangled. She had reddish hair and wore a distinctive multicolored blouse. Investigators found no identification and no reliable witness sightings. That victim, known for decades only as Knox County Jane Doe, was finally identified in 2018 as 4-year-old Tina Marie Farmer from Indiana. The match was made through DNA submitted by her family to national missing persons databases. In January 1984, another victim was discovered along Interstate 40 near Jellicoe in Campbell County, Tennessee. She had reddish hair and was found nude, with no personal items nearby. The condition of the remains suggested she had been killed elsewhere and transported to the location. Her case remained unsolved and unidentified for decades, until genetic genealogy identified her in 2022 as 9-year-old Elizabeth Lamott from New Hampshire, who had disappeared in 1984 while living in Tennessee. Later in 1984, additional victims began appearing. In March of that year, the remains of a woman were discovered along Interstate 40 inches, Greene County, Tennessee. She had auburn hair and was believed to be in her 20s. Investigators could not determine her identity. Her death was classified as homicide. Because her body showed no signs of robbery, investigators suspected she may have known her killer. Her case remains unsolved. In September 1984, the body of another woman was found in a wooded area near Harlan, Kentucky. She had red hair and was believed to be between 20 and 35 years old. Her remains showed no signs of sexual assault, and she had been dead for several months before discovery. She, too, remained unidentified for decades. In 2019, DNA technology confirmed she was 6-year-old Tracy Walker of Indiana. Throughout 1,984 and 1,985, more victims appeared along highways in West Virginia, Arkansas, and Mississippi. The circumstances were similar. Young women, most believed to be hitchhikers or traveling between states, killed by strangulation or blunt force trauma. Many had been transported across state lines after their deaths. Investigators from multiple jurisdictions noticed the recurring similarities: reddish hair, bodies found near major interstates, limited personal belongings, and the likelihood that the victims lived transient lifestyles. Because of these patterns, the cases were eventually linked by regional law enforcement and the FBI under the informal name, the Redhead Murders. At the time, forensic resources were limited. DNA testing was not widely available. Multiple state agencies handled their own cases independently, and communication between jurisdictions was sometimes slow or incomplete. Without a centralized information system, critical details about one victim were not always shared promptly with investigators in neighboring states. The lack of identification hindered progress. Without knowing who the victims were, investigators struggled to trace their last known movements or the individuals they may have encountered before their deaths. The geographic pattern suggested a killer traveling regularly through the region, possibly a long-haul truck driver, or someone whose occupation allowed them to move quickly from state to state. The body locations, often near truck stops, way stations, and exits along major interstates such as I-40, I-75, I-81, and I-70 supported this theory. Witnesses occasionally reported seeing hitchhikers with red hair near these areas, but the descriptions varied too widely to produce a reliable suspect sketch. In 1985, a break in the pattern came when a surviving victim from the region reported being attacked by a man with a truck driver's background. Her case, however, was not conclusively tied to the Redhead murders. Investigators from Tennessee and the FBI interviewed numerous long-haul drivers, documented their routes, and compared them to victim recovery sites. None of the suspects at that time could be directly linked to all the murders. In 1985, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation formed a multi-agency task force to examine the cases. They reviewed evidence from each victim, compared autopsy reports, and looked for forensic traces that might connect one scene to another. The task force later stated that the murders shared enough similarities to suggest a single offender or small set of offenders, but investigators lacked physical evidence tying the deaths to one suspect. By the late 1992, advances in DNA analysis gave renewed hope. Unidentified victims' remains were re-examined, and DNA profiles were entered into national systems such as CODIS and NamUs. Over the next 2 decades, several victims were finally identified through a combination of DNA and genealogical research. In 2018, the the Knox County victim, discovered in 1983, was identified as 1-year-old Tina Farmer. The identification allowed investigators to revisit her last known movements. She had last been seen traveling with a long-haul trucker from Indiana to Tennessee. The driver became a person of interest, but no charges were filed. In 2019, the victim found in Kentucky in 1984 was identified as 6-year-old Tracy Walker. She had been reported missing by her family decades earlier. The identification closed the missing persons portion of the case, but did not produce a suspect. In 2022, the long unidentified Jellicoe victim was identified as 9-year-old Elizabeth Lamott. Her identification helped connect her to the time frame and region, but did not reveal who had killed her. Despite these identifications, none of the redhead murders have been conclusively attributed to a single offender. In the early 2020s, renewed investigative interest highlighted the likelihood that the victims shared vulnerabilities: transient lifestyles, hitchhiking, limited family contact, and movement across state lines. These factors made them more susceptible to predatory offenders using interstate travel patterns. Law enforcement publicly stated that the cases remain open and active in Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, and West Virginia. To date, at least 6 victims are formally recognized as part of the redhead murders cluster, though some investigators believe the true number may be higher. Forensic genealogical efforts continue to examine unidentified remains from the same region and time frame. The identity of the killer, or killers, remains unknown. The case stands as one of the most complex multi-state serial murder investigations of the 1,980 shaped by fragmented communication, limited forensic tools, and unidentified victims whose names only became known decades later. As of 2025, the murders remain unsolved, but the identification of victims like Tina Farmer, Tracy Walker, and Elizabeth Lamott has provided investigators with new opportunities to retrace their final days. Their names, once unknown, have now been restored, leaving one remaining question: who killed them and why?